You mentioned oils, and there's, I think, two very popular ones that people are now thinking are healthy, and olive oil is one that people have thought for many years is healthy. The new one on the block is coconut oil. Can you talk about both of those and what you think?
Yeah, well, the olive oil thing came into being because of the Mediterranean diet, right? And very interesting, there was just an article published, I think 6 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal that talked about this a lot. I forget the name of the doctor that did the research that showed that the Mediterranean diet provides less heart disease and greater lifespans, right? But the data that he used, the data pool that he looked at was skewed because he went to the Mediterranean during Lent when people were not eating meat and they were avoiding butter, and it was right after World War II when they didn't have a lot of that stuff anyway. So they were kind of living on a subsistence diet. And the data pool that he examined had a built-in bias, and it wasn't as good of a data pool as he said that it was. And yet, by gathering half truths and half information, basically the intention of which was to support his claim, right, that oil is good for you. And I don't know why he had that agenda, but there had to be something going on there. The horse was out of the barn, the cat was out of the bag, and then it became reality by consensus, right? When, in point of fact, the longest lived people in the Mediterranean at that point in time were an indigenous people in the middle of the island of Sardinia. And their life expectancy was statistically significantly higher than anybody else in the Mediterranean. And the only difference between them and everybody else was they hated olive oil. They didn't use it. They lived on lamb and root vegetables, right? And some fruits and nuts. They had no oil, and they used milk and butter and lard. They didn't use olive oil. And by avoiding olive oil, they lived an extra 5 years. But because he didn't include that data pool into his research, and because it was just bad research, he came up with the misleading conclusion that oil is good for you. Also, Procter & Gamble in the 1930s gave the American Heart Association $1.7 million. And in return, the American Heart Association, which at that point in time was a struggling professional organization. Now they're $1.7 billion richer, and in return for the $1.7 million, the American Heart Association's job was to say that Crisco is healthy and that butter and animal fats are not. Why? Because Procter & Gamble sold Crisco, which originally was intended as an automobile lubricant, right? So now all of a sudden, millions of Americans are throwing their butter away, throwing their lard away because of faulty research that nobody questioned. And this is one of my other pet peeves with the medical profession. You know, the stuff that I talk about with medical nutrition is academic. It's science-based, clinically verified. It's academic. You can't argue it. You can if you want, but you'd be wrong. When it comes to things like, is oil good or is oil bad? Is margarine good or is margarine bad? The MDs do not bring to bear intellectual scrutiny to the research. They don't. They just go along in lockstep with whatever their colleagues say. They don't question it. It's bad science. It's intellectual cowardice because nobody wants to step outside of the box. Nobody in MD land wants to question authority because if they do, they're going to lose their license. And this is a big problem. The people that are supposed to have our backs with objectified assessment of the research have failed us over and over and over and over again. And we give them a pass. And it's a gigantic problem. So, to answer the original question, the stuff about oil and the stuff about butter has entered into collective consciousness because of bad science, which was then parlayed in by the food industry into reality by consensus. And then once it was reality by consensus, nobody questioned the original research. So the MDs, again, through default, let us down. And we've suffered. If you have a relative that suffered coronary artery disease, it's Procter & Gamble's fault.